Wonderful. Thank you very much, Katya. Good afternoon, everybody, and also our viewers, presenters for joining us remotely today on this two-hour event, which Bruegel is co-organizing together with Internomics, the journal on policymaking, on a subject that will actually be very heavily debated by the end of the week here in Brussels on the issue of enlargement. And we have, at Bruegel, be doing a lot of research on this, and we will continue to actually discuss these issues throughout the coming year of how to enlarge the EU and which countries to allow to become members. So today we have a number of distinguished guests here with us, together with our host in Internomics, to discuss this issue, and we have two sessions. In the first session, we will talk about pros and cons of enlargement for the EU, seen from a political economy perspective and much of a governance perspective. And in the second session, we will be joined by our experts who will talk about other dimensions that have to do with enlargement, on security, on politics, and we are delighted also that we have Ukrainian participants to talk to us. In the first session, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, experts on these issues, on EU architecture and EU neighborhood policy. One of them is here with me, Andre Sapir. Welcome, Andre. And the other one is joining us remotely, Marek Dabrowski, who today is unfortunately not with us in person, but certainly is here in the event. We have an hour and a quarter to discuss these issues. I would like to ask the experts to take 15 minutes to give us their perspectives. We have orchestrated this to hear both pros and cons. Seen certainly from the EU perspective, hopefully to give you the spectrum of arguments that we need to consider when we're discussing these things. And then we will, of course, take questions here from our audience who is present at Bruegel, but also from you who is joining online. If you wanted to ask questions, please do. I will be monitoring those. We're using slido.com. And the hashtag that you need to use is enlargement. Do join us, and I will be monitoring these discussions. So with that, I would like to give the floor first to Marek for his introductory remarks. Marek, the floor is yours.
Looks that we are very close to the decision. Do you hear me well? Or there are some problems? Do you hear me? I'm not sure. Do you hear me?
Wait. Are you sure you're not on mute, Marek?
No, I am not mute.
No. Okay, now then it's our problem. Are you him there?
I hear him there.
Well, I am not sure about strength of connection in the office where I am now, but
here that is no sound.
Here on the session.
Hello, do you hear me? Hello. 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 Okay, let's.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. It looks that we are very close to the decision of granting the EU candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova. And I personally believe that is the right decision, and I try briefly explain why. First, I think that is some matter of historical justice, I would put it this way. Post-communist countries of Central Europe and Baltic countries received this chance already in early 1990s or mid-1990s. Countries of former Yugoslavia and Albania received this chance in 2003 in Thessaloniki summit. countries of former Soviet Union, not all of them are interested in this perspective, but definitely the three countries expressed several times interest. This was Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Never received this kind of perspective, and they were even denied. So I think that's fair that they can also enter this road. Second, I think that as historical experience of subsequent EU enlargement demonstrates, starting from Mediterranean enlargement in 1980s and early 1990s, that this is a very powerful process from the point of view of anchoring domestic reforms, both political and economic. And practically this is the most effective instruments which so far EU developed, of course, under conditions that this is the process is credible, that the incumbent EU member states are really ready to move in this direction, and the end of this road grant membership to the candidate. And all other, I would say, forms, like we know that since 2004, within the European neighborhood policy, both in south and eastern dimensions, there were several forms of even pretty close cooperation, especially in economic sphere, but short of membership perspective, that they gave limited results. Limited results in terms of stimulating progress of economic and political reforms. So basically, this gives chance to move this process forward in countries which receive candidate status. And I think that further enlargement is also very important for EU, because I think experience of last 2 decades shows that it's not in the interest of EU to have some unstable territories close to its border. The same applies to Western Balkans. I will shortly come back to the problem of Western Balkans. Western Balkans are generally in the, I would say, between one major part of EU territory and southeastern part of EU territory. In case of Ukraine, Moldova is a bit different, but still there are closely neighboring areas, and it's not in European interest to have economically and politically unstable neighbors. And but I think that this is argumentation which I used in my blog post, and if we spoke month or 2 months ago, I would basically concentrate on this. But as we are, I believe, close to granting candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova, it's very important to ask what next, because I think that it would be also very bad, very unproductive if this status is granted and nothing happens after. I think that is very important in case of both countries to try as quickly as possible to draw some roadmap for the further steps. I mean, in case of Moldova, I think this is just problem of how to plan and how to start membership negotiation. In case of Ukraine, I think that negotiation they can also start in near future, but of course there is also necessary to design plan for the current assistance, which is going, but I think that the role of the EU is provide financial economic assistance just now, and then of course also to think how to organize this process after the conflict ends. So post-war reconstruction, this is a situation which also must be, it would be better to plan in advance. Of course, we don't know when this conflict can end and in which situation Ukraine will be left after this conflict. But still, I think some ideas and some direction of this post-war reconstruction can be discussed apart from regular membership and negotiation, which will concern 35 chapters of acquis. But to make this process credible, I think it's also very important to revitalize enlargement process for Western Balkans. Of course, there's very much country-specific. We have some situation when, I will not country names, when we observe reversal of reforms, especially in political sphere. And here, of course, position of EU must be very firm. It shouldn't overlook such situation. It shouldn't reward country for backtracking on the reforms, especially on some basic value like rule of law or democracy, etc. But we have also countries, and I mean especially North Macedonia and Albania, which North Macedonia is EU candidate for more than 15 years, and the principal decision to start negotiation was already taken, but still is blocked. Again, I will now not go into this by whom and why, but we all know this, and I think that this is very important to renew this process, because otherwise both this region will remain some sort of vacuum, but also the new candidates, they will be unsure about their prospect, because also the same fate can wait them, and for some reasons, at some point. Finally, I think that it's very often some created some alternative, whether you should think about enlarging or deepening. For me, it's a wrong alternative. EU needs both enlarging and deepening of integration, and these two processes are they will help each other to move forward. In some sense, institutional sense, it's clear that even a larger EU will have difficulty to function with unanimity decision, foreign policy, in tax issue, with budget, etc. But also enlargement. It's actually, what has happened in enlargement in Western Balkans is exactly overuse of veto power of individual countries. I'm not going to go so far that to suggest that all decisions, for example, enlargement decisions, should be taken by qualified majority. I think that granting the very beginning of this process, granting candidate status, and the end of this process, meaning concluding negotiation and proposal to give membership status, they require unanimity decision. But I think that the qualified majority decision should be applied to other decisions which are more technical, like opening subsequent chapters of negotiations. This I think that they shouldn't be used for blocking and I don't know, some political bargaining. So basically, I think these two processes should be moved forward. Of course, we are after Future of Europe conference where some ideas were formulated. Also, I think that I am not specialist on intra-EU politics, but I think that this is also possible to interlink of both processes, that we have countries, probably we have some countries which are sympathetic to enlargement, but not always sympathetic to deepening integration. So they should understand this interlink, that enlargement will be possible only if we make progress integration. And vice versa, that deepening should not be used as excuse for stopping enlargement. So basically, these are basic thoughts which I want to present in the first round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marek. Lots of questions to and issues to discuss. We've heard a rather positive view on enlargement, and what I'd like us to also think a little bit about is the reasons why the EU should do that. I mean, we've heard some reasons for why countries would want to come into the EU, particularly in anchoring domestic reforms. Interesting, you said, Marek, the very old known trade-off between enlargement and deepening. You're arguing that this is not a trade-off, that one should really help the other. I think Andre is going to have some issues with that, but there is a few questions that I wanted to ask for you, Marek. I'll perhaps maybe I pose them and then we can, if you can think about them and come back at the end. There is one country you didn't mention, and that is Turkey. And perhaps we could think about enlargement also in the context of Turkey. Is there a reason why you didn't include Turkey, or you know, what is the reason for that?
I will mention it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, you know, a little bit about why you mentioned it en passant, but you hadn't really given us a lot of the rationale behind it. Why the EU needs to do this? It needs to enlarge. What are the dimensions that are of relevance here that the EU needs to take? But please hold your horses. I would like to give the floor first to Andre, because he's going to give us some other views as well. And then we'll come to discussion. Andre, I believe you also have some slides. If we can have the slides up, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria, for having me on this program. I think I've been built as a bit of opposite view from Marek, but as we shall see, there's quite a lot of convergence actually, even on the widening and deepening issue. So I in a sense will do like Marek and move away from you know, what we wrote in a sense 2 months ago, and we are at a different time in the not only in the war in Ukraine, but also in the institutional process in Brussels. The Commission has already given its opinion. The European Council will presumably decide something this week. So obviously we need to adjust our thinking. Now, so I think like him, in a sense, what is more interesting is to discuss what's next.
Exactly.
So I think one can fairly assume, although I don't think it's completely a foregone conclusion, that the European Council will follow the proposal of the Commission to grant candidate status to Ukraine and to Moldova. And I think what one needs to do is, in a sense, discuss what are the prospects. First, yes, okay, obtain candidate status. As I said, I think that's more or less foregone conclusion. But in my last slides, I will come to, I think, some of the conditions that need to be attached to this, and that I think relates to the deepening process. But then, what are the prospects indeed to begin the negotiations, and mostly to conclude the negotiations, and to have accession, because I think, as Marek rightly indicated, this could be a very lengthy process, and that would be very frustrating. So one needs to discuss that. So it seems to me that the prospects for membership will depend on two elements. One, the fulfillment of the criteria, including the conditions attached to the launching of the negotiations, because there are conditions there. If you read the opinion of the Commission that recommends granting candidate status, it recommends doing that subject to certain conditions. Okay? So there are conditions, in a sense, for attached to the start of the process, but then there are obviously all the conditions that we know, the process that previous member states went through, that one needs to fulfill, in a sense, the acquis communautaire, basically. So one of the factors on which it will depend is the ability of the new candidate countries to fulfill the conditions. But the other one is indeed, and I think that was already mentioned by Marek as well, is the ability of the EU to function with additional members. We are 27 members. We know some of our strengths, some of our weaknesses, and now we are contemplating adding a number of new countries. And I think at each step of widening, there's been the discussion about deepening, and this is certainly there as well this time. So those are the two issues that I want to discuss from the perspective of the candidate countries, their ability to fulfill the conditions, and then the more institutional questions about the EU. Now, I will also, I don't know to which. Where do I need to
think there
point?
you need to.
No, I'm not able to move. Maybe Maria, maybe you are more expert than I am. Great. Thank you. So I think I will start by looking at Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia in the light of, indeed, the Western Balkan countries. As Marek indicated, in 2003, in the aftermath of the Yugoslav war, the EU member states agreed to support efforts by 6 Western Balkan countries to join the EU. All 6 countries did apply for candidate status, some, or at least one already in 2003, and then others up to 2016. 5 of the 6 Western Balkan countries were given, have already been given candidate status. One has not. I'll show that in a moment. Negotiations were then launched with 3 of the 5 countries that received candidate status, and they were concluded and led to accession by one of them, Croatia. So if I just show this table, I don't know whether you can all see. What I'm doing in this table simply is to give the calendar for the 6 Western Balkan countries. What was, I'm not giving the exact date, but the month where they applied, and the countries are ranked there. From the first one that applied was Croatia. The most recent one is Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2016. So when they applied, when they received candidate status, when the negotiations started, and then when the negotiation ended with the treaty, and then when was the accession. So, I mean, you see here, and I think that's very important, I think, to keep in mind that the one country that applied the first and the only one that has gone through the full process, that is Croatia, that took 10 years. Okay, so Croatia applied in 2003, the very first one, and went through the whole process relatively rapidly. Okay, so relatively rapidly means 10 years. Okay, that's what this shows. And then it shows also that other countries, some have gotten stuck, some not. One of them, Bosnia-Herzegovina, that Marek mentioned, having not yet received candidate status, although it did apply in 2016, and then 2 countries being blocked by Bulgaria, Northern Macedonia and Albania, have not yet received the start of the negotiation. So they were given status, but they're in limbo, no negotiation. Okay? And then there are countries, 3 of them, 2 of them not yet, Montenegro and Serbia, that are in the process of negotiation, but they've been in process of negotiation for 9 or 10 years already and not yet successful. So I think the lesson from this, I'm not saying that, you know, necessarily the time will be as long or as short for Ukraine, but I think it's good to keep in mind what was the recent experience. And I put here at the bottom, Maria, you mentioned Turkey. Good to remind ourselves about the calendar of Turkey. Turkey applied 1987, was given candidate status in 1999. Negotiations started in 2005. And negotiations are still with us. Now, what I do in the next table is basically reproduce what I had in the previous table. I've added 1 column, and the 1 column there is the EBRD. The EBRD, as you know, has been involved in the process of since enlargement, of transition since the start, and they've produced this annual report on transition, and they have various indicators of performance of countries. And here I reproduce one, the one that I think is relevant, and this is the latest. This is published in 2021, so this is the current situation, if you want, or the situation before the war in Ukraine. So it's the EBRD governance index, and I put it just for the Western Balkan countries, and then for Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, as well as Turkey. Now, what you see there is that of the 3 new applicants, the 2 countries that the Commission recommends granting candidate status, that is Ukraine and Moldova, are not faring particularly well in terms of governance. No, not faring particularly well in terms of governance should not be a reason potentially for not granting candidate status. Again, I don't want to discuss, should we or should we not grant the candidate. I'm taking that for granted, in a sense that, for political reasons, the wars happen, and I think the solidarity needs to be there, and that this is a sign of solidarity. So I'm moving forward. Okay, you have done that. Now, what are the prospects for membership? So you see that Ukraine and Moldova have rather low indicator of governance. The country here that is the worst measure is Bosnia-Herzegovina. Okay, so by the way, Georgia, which is not in the countries recommended, is the one of the 3 that has the best index, and Turkey is where it is. Now, so what I'm drawing from this is, I think, obviously the war has come, my assumption is that had the war not happened, we would not be sitting here talking about accession. So I think we have to, however painful it is, but we have to remain analysts into this. Sure, the war has happened. The war does, and especially for Ukraine, does imply that the European Union should show solidarity and should give Ukraine a prospect for after the war. I support that. This is a political statement in a sense. So as a citizen, I support this. But as an analyst, I can't forget what are the other situations, and that is, I think some of those countries being far or were far before the war in terms of fulfilling the conditions for accession. So there are two possibilities, therefore. One is that it's going to be a very, very long process, and therefore a very frustrating process. Okay, because again, I can sympathize with the people of Ukraine, who are fighting a very tough war, and do need to see light at the end of the tunnel. And one of those lights is certainly, and a bright light is the blue sky of Europe. So I think this is indeed something helping them to sustain their effort. At the same time, I don't think that we can have a process of enlargement that would not respect our own conditions. So how to deal with that? Obviously, one possibility is that, and one need is probably that the EU will have to do much more in terms of helping those countries, and probably also some of the Western Balkans that have been in the pipeline for a while, to fulfill those conditions. So then we are back to assistance to the processes, not just by the Commission, but including by the Commission, also by other institutions. So let me move then to the other side of the discussion, the institutional process in the European Union, and let me talk about the issue of differentiated integration. I think differentiated integration is a word or is an expression which is pronounced with some hope by some and fear by others. And so I think what there is need to do in this context is to see that I think the question of differentiated integration, and I will then discuss what I understand it to be, because I think there are different meanings, and I want to explain that of differentiated integration. I think that issue is there because indeed the process of integration, of accession of the new candidates is likely to be long. Okay. However, we managed to help the countries, given the starting point, and given that 6 months ago, as I said, we probably would not have considered at all accession, and that, okay, one can discuss, and I think maybe that's part of the discussion. As the war, apart from political reason, as the war changed certain elements in the countries, that would make them able faster than one would have expected before to fulfill the conditions. I think that would be. I don't have a view on that. I think one can debate the two sides of this argument. The second question is that indeed it's clear that, and one cannot be blind to that, some of the current member states are certainly reluctant to widen the EU without having deepening. And this was also the discussion of Marek, indicating that the two should go hand in hand. I believe indeed it needs to be go hand in hand, but I think it's easier said than done. So lastly, therefore, for my last 2 slides, let me go into what I believe are 2 different concepts of differentiated integration. I think there is differentiation of integration within the EU and outside the EU, and I think sometimes there is a bit of confusion between the two. So, next slide. Let me therefore discuss those two types of differentiated integration, and let me start with differentiated integration inside the EU. Maria, we wrote together with others a paper on this. Was partly drawing on a paper that on a volume that I had co-authored in the 1990s already, and this was already reflecting to the Eastern enlargement. So in 1990s, okay, we were in the process of the Eastern enlargement that then resulted in 10 new member states joining the EU in 2004. Okay? And so many of us were already reflecting to this question of, deepening and widening. Okay? And the view was already that, okay, one needs to do the two. That the EU was probably need to be reformed in order to be able to have the accession of the 10 new member states. And so in what we wrote together, you, I, and others here at Bruegel, and that I had also co-authored before, one central concept there about sort of differentiated integration inside the EU was to make a difference between the common base and open partnerships. In a sense, membership of the EU should mean membership to a number of policies, a common base. Every member state entering into the EU means that you need to do a number of elements, the acquis communautaire. Okay, but then, and that was the view that we had already back in the 1990s. As we were considering the fact that 10 new member states would enter with much greater differentiation of countries, simply of their reality and maybe of their preferences. Countries should be able, in a sense, to experiment with new areas, what we refer to as open partnerships. In a sense, we have open partnerships. The euro is an open partnership. It's a partnership decided by all countries. Okay? So the rules have not been set by a small group of countries, an inner core. It's not an inner core deciding, it's all the countries together deciding on certain rules of partnership, but then only some countries join it at some stage. But it's open to all the others. Okay, we can enter into the discussion. We know the euro is compulsory, really. Okay, it's a partnership, but it's something between the common base, because all countries need to participate, but at their rhythm. Okay, and we know the situation of Sweden. I mean, we know the situation of Denmark. Schengen is also something like an open partnership. So this part of the EU that everybody belongs to, and then other parts that countries join at their own rhythm. And so, in a sense, you can say that inside the European Union, we have had differentiated membership for a very, very long time. So we are all member of the EU, but within the EU, not all countries necessarily belong to all policies. It's been the same with foreign policy. Right? Denmark has just decided to join the foreign and security policy. Now, in that approach, the smaller the base, the narrower the base, the lower the threshold to entry. Okay, if you said that, okay, the base was simply the single market. Okay, so it means that in order to become a member of the EU, you would fulfill the condition to be able to enter into the base. Whether you can enter partnership or not, it's something that can come at a later time. So the threshold for allowing new members to enter is much lower, right? If you have fewer policies. Sure. But means that you have also a bit of à la carte inside. Okay, so there is a trade-off between. So you can allow more countries to enter, but then there is differentiation. And some countries obviously can regard that as a positive element. some as a negative element. So there is some kind of a trade-off there. The other kind of differentiated integration is outside the EU. Okay, so if you think of concentric circles, you can have concentric circles inside the EU, but you can have also concentric circles where one of the circles is the EU itself, and then there are concentric circles outside the EU. Okay, this is what we had put forward in this European Continental Partnership, the paper that we wrote after Brexit. But we wrote this paper thinking about an arrangement for the UK, but also potentially for other countries. Turkey, Ukraine at that time, obviously before the war. Macron's idea, and taken by others, Enrico Letta in Italy, for instance, the European political community is something of that sort. Okay, so it's covering potentially all of the countries of Europe, some of which are inside the EU, but some are outside. So this is differentiation on the outside. So the countries inside, they're all members of the EU, but then the countries that are outside and that are connected to the EU, in a sense, you can look at this as if the common base is even smaller. For instance, in our paper on the European Continental Partnership, we did not have the full single market, the full 4 freedoms. We had only 3 freedoms because there was not the freedom of labor mobility. So it's a narrower base even. So, okay. All of the countries in this community belong to certain common base, whether they are values or they're economic in terms of single market, but then others do not, and they are located themselves in different places. Now, a good question to ask, to which I will leave for the discussion, is whether if countries are in this differentiated integration but outside of the EU, is that a stepping stone, a stumbling block towards EU accession? If you think of, just to be concrete, if Ukraine, if we say, well, the process for accession of Ukraine is going to be 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, we shall see what it is. Now, is the idea that in the meantime, Ukraine and other countries already belong to this outer layer, this European political community, is that the good news in terms of their future accession? Or is it bad news? Is it something that we are trying to push them out there and keep them there, okay, and never have any prospect of accession, even though we have given them in principle candidate status? Or should they see that they're already part of the family, and little by little they will belong to the inner core to EU integration? I think that's something to be discussed. And then finally, the widening and deepening issue. I do agree with Marek, and I will use the term a grand bargain. I think this is what I would hope to see this week at the European Council, an agreement whereby indeed Ukraine and Moldova would be granted accession status, but at the same time, where the countries would decide to launch a new convention. It's not a non-convention, but a new convention on the future of Europe. And I think, like Marek, I think that requires a bargain between, I think, the Eastern countries that are most keen for the widening, but less so for the deepening, and the more Western countries that are more keen on, perhaps, on the deepening than on the widening. And I think this is where the minds should meet this week. But it seems to me the two need to go together. And this is, I think, incumbent, in a sense, on the presidency to ensure that this deal. We don't just get one side of the deal, but we get the grand bargain. let me stop here.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andreas. So they need to go together, but can they go together? I mean, I think that's I think the thing to discuss now. Lots of very interesting questions coming from our audience, and of course, I will give the floor also here to our audience here who is physically present. Marek, can we bring you back on the screen, please?
Sorry.
Yeah, hi, Marek. Welcome back. You're back on the screen. We can see you. Marek, can we go back to the questions I asked earlier? When you didn't mention Turkey, if you could say something about that, and then of course the issue of enlarging versus deepening. Both of you have now converged on saying that two need to go hand in hand, and I'm going to ask you both this question: can they go hand in hand? And actually, if I may also, Marek, ask a question that I think has appeared many times now in the questions that are coming from our audience who are watching online, and it has to do with this issue whether granting status to Moldova and to the Ukraine actually bypasses the queue and dedicates resources to countries. It takes away resources from countries and dedicates them to others. Is this something you share, or other reasons why this should be happening?
Okay, on Turkey, I think that Turkey is already a candidate country. It's started negotiation. They are frozen. At the current moment, it doesn't meet Copenhagen criteria. So basically, I think decision to stop de facto negotiation the negotiation is the right decision. But I don't exclude perspective that at some point Turkey will come back on the way of democracy, rule of law, and reforming its economy. So I am absolutely against excluding Turkey up front, because this is Turkey, not going in further kind of implicit justification, as was done, unfortunately, some 15 years ago, where Turkey, at that time, my opinion was negotiated in good fight its accession, but some incumbent member states, they for various reasons, they didn't like to see Turkey among new members. So coming back, I think that it should be treated in fair way and merit-based. Then another argument which I would like to reiterate, that in my opinion, membership negotiation should be maximally merit-based. If countries meet certain conditions, it should move forward. If manage to conclude negotiation on a given chapter, we close negotiation on this chapter. If meets some precondition, we open negotiation charter. This was the reason of my proposal, that the political character should have been kept only in 2 points: entry points, granting candidate status, and perhaps opening negotiation, and then closing negotiation, proposing membership. Between, it should be much more technical process. And then I think that the problem, which was very well presented by Andre, that de facto Western Balkan enlargement process stall, would be solved. I guess that some countries would benefit from such approach, that they could start finally negotiation and they could move forward. Perhaps some other, for some reasons, they would be still stalled because they would not like to improve the internal governance and the political systems. But generally, this process would be much more transparent and fair. And what else? Maybe a very short comment on
That was very short.
We can take
Marek, I think we've lost you. Ah, okay.
Can we take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, well, don't worry, I'll come there. But Andre, can I come back to you with this? You said something very interesting, actually, and I'm hoping that you might be able to elaborate. That you said, and I totally agree with you, that if the war in Ukraine hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be discussing this. So something's changed, and we know very clearly, I think, why Ukraine needs EU membership. I think that's not difficult to see. But can you give us a little bit of an insight why things might have changed from the EU perspective? What is now more relevant than wasn't perhaps quite so relevant 2 months ago in view of enlargement? I mean, what is the new dimension that the EU must take into consideration, given, of course, the war in Ukraine? And of course, that brings me to the enlargement versus deepening discussion. Should we be viewing this from a different perspective now? If you can't do both, which one should you do first?
Look, maybe I can answer by addressing an issue that I did not address in my presentation, and this is issue of defense. Because there's, one of the dimensions of deepening of integration, I think, does relate to defense. All the geopolitical issues, but defense. And I think, I can understand the argument that is made about why Ukraine should join the EU. Defense of Ukraine, defense of the rest of Europe. Okay, the argument that has been made by the Ukrainians since the start of the war, that their fight is also our fight. Okay, they're also fighting for us. I think one has to take that obviously very seriously. At the same time, I think we should not be naive. What is the defense that we can really offer by membership of the European Union to Ukraine? It's not very much in military terms. So this would be a very different situation with the situation that happened to Poland, to other Eastern countries. When they joined the EU, they did that after having joined NATO. Right? They view that as far as defense is concerned, as far as security is concerned, security was provided to them by NATO membership. And that was the first step that they did. Okay? After 1989. First, ensuring their security, NATO membership, and after ensuring their economic well-being by joining and values joining the European Union. Now here with Ukraine is something rather different. Now, I personally don't believe that membership of the EU is a substitute to membership of NATO as far as the security is concerned. And so that leaves that entire question on the table. So it's completely different than the process that we had before. Okay? What's happening with NATO? With NATO and Ukraine? Because if indeed that is being viewed as out of bounds and only joining the EU, then in a sense the expectation of Ukraine vis-à-vis the European Union would be, in my view, completely impossible to fulfill for a long time. I'm not saying that one day we will not have a European defense, but let's say in the foreseeable future, that would not be there. So I think that's one of the dimensions, which is a very, I'm a bit ill at ease to discuss this because I'm going outside of my zone of comfort. But I think we have to come to grips to that, also in our thinking about what it means for us to deepen, what it means this relationship with Ukraine, what are their expectations, what is it we can provide reasonably, and again not let expectation to be unreasonably ballooned.
Perhaps we need another session for this, because this is an incredibly interesting point. Marek, you're back. You had a short comment, but before we give you the floor, do you mind if we take a couple of questions here from the floor? Yeah, please, Powell, gentleman over there. Maybe one more question, if there is anybody. Powell, please.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for these excellent presentations. I would like to speak about one enlargement that wasn't mentioned here. And I think it's also because of that enlargement that we are here today on top of the war in Ukraine, namely the 2008 non-enlargement, non-NATO enlargement towards Ukraine and Georgia, because as you rightly remember, that was the time when the eastern parts of the EU, together with the American president, tried to convince the western part of the EU to allow Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO for security reasons. And as you rightly remember, the then president of the French Republic, Sarkozy, together with the Chancellor Merkel, decided that they had a different vision of security. And they quoted one fear which they had at that time, officially quoted, it was stated officially, you can find it still on the NATO webpage. It was back then the German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who is now the President of the Republic. He said that we shouldn't irritate Russians. It was April 2008, and 4 months later, Putin invaded Georgia. And the response from the West was practically zero. So, in my opinion, back then, it was a very important moment when I'm not saying that with the knowledge we have today that I'm not judging the decision, but we have to learn from that experience in order to see the situation properly these days. Why I'm saying that? Because we have a mess on the east of Europe, and we still have a relatively stable situation in the south of Europe. And of course, granting Ukraine and Moldova accession talks is a very important symbol, because it gives hope. And you cannot win a war if you don't have hope. So it's a very, very firm and very important step that we shouldn't underestimate. And actually, this step happened last Friday with the visit of Super Mario Draghi, who actually, as I imagine, helped to convince both the president and the chancellor to do this. Which is also interesting, because Draghi is not an elected prime minister. So it also tells us about the institutional sort of capacity of the leaders who are elected, unelected. But that's a side comment. But my point is that so on the east we are trying to sort out the situation, whereas if we do not have a very firm response to our Balkan friends, our credibility with accession talks with the East is literally zero. And it's not because of Bulgaria that is now having problems with Northern Macedonia and Albania, because I remember very well in 2018 we had a summit. I was back then working in the European Council. We had a summit of the Western Balkans with the EU leaders. And back then it was French president and the Dutch prime minister who were blocking the green light for those countries. We are not talking about concluding negotiations. We are talking about the green light to start accession talks. And it was 4 years ago, and the question is now, so what will be the offer? And we have again EU Western Balkans summit this week in Brussels. So it's very interesting. I think it's very important that there is a very firm political message that we've learned from our past mistakes in the East, and we've realized that we've been dragging our feet for too long in the South, and we do not want to have a very unstable security situation in the South, and therefore we have a very credible offer for all the Balkan states, which, by the way, you know, because there are these big fears what would happen. I mean, all the 6 Balkan states amounts to, when it comes to population, to the Netherlands. So that's the, you know, just to imagine what kind of enlargement we are talking about. And this brings me to the point that Andre made on differentiated integration outside of the EU. And you quoted the first reason that because the process is long. And I think it could have been true in the past, but now with the Balkan history and, you know, the states who have been, you know, frozen in the talks for domestic political reasons in France, in the Netherlands, and I'm not judging these reasons because they are valid reasons. You know, we had lost referenda in France and the Netherlands because of the enlargement. So there is some kind of a logic there. But, you know, we have to be frank in admitting that, you know, it's not about differentiated integration outside of the EU because, you know, it takes too long, because this point I think it's proven that it's not the case, because this differentiated integration outside of the EU is, in my view, used as a fig leaf for not doing our internal reforms, you know, in the EU. So I just, you know, wanted to end up with this remark and just to say that, you know, we need more imagination and courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Sorry, there was a question here from the floor just behind the gentleman. Is there any other questions that we could take? Please.
Thank you. Another Andre in the room, Andre de Munter, European Parliament. Thank you for this. My question would be to Professor Sapir. I mean, if I noted correctly from your wish list for the European Council, it is granting candidate status. I think I saw accession status, but candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova. And then the launch of a new convention. I would have 2 questions. First of all, I'm sorely missing something on the Western Balkans in your wish list? Or do you think nothing will happen there? And secondly, the convention, do you refer then to the convention like we had in the early years 2000? Would it be modeled on that? What would be the objectives that you would have in mind, and who would participate in that convention? Thank you. And thank you for making the remark on the total population represented in the Western Balkan 6, because that's something that people tend to forget.
Scale.
And also the almost 3,000 kilometers of borders with EU member states and 100% surrounded by EU member states. 100%. And if I can make a small remark, I mean, on Bulgaria, I mean, people may call it nuance, but I mean, Bulgaria has issues with North Macedonia, but not with Albania. But Albania is drawn into, it's taken hostage as the situation was reversed a couple of years ago before Bulgaria began. The 2 countries have been coupled, artificially I called it. They have their own merits. They happen to have in common that at the same moment they have a positive recommendation for the Commission, but they are not coupled like a married couple, I would say.
Thank you for that. And actually, interesting, nobody has even mentioned the Kosovos, because this question is coming also. It would be nice to also put Kosovo in this discussion. Marek, can we come back to you first for comments and then to Andre?
Okay. Let me come back where I'm. Techniques stop me. I just want to make a few brief comments on this differentiated integration. Actually, we have both inside EU and outside. Inside, it's clear that not all member countries belong to Euro area, not all belong to Schengen. There are, once new member state joins, it has some transitory periods, etc., etc. We have enhanced integration mechanisms, etc. But also, when we look outside the EU, we have also several instruments. For example, candidates countries or potential candidates countries, there are in various stages of negotiation, and so they are more or less integrated already. Then we have the very broad palette of association agreements, free trade agreements, of various degree of ambitions and various thematic coverage. Then we have partnership cooperation agreements. Also within European neighborhood policy, we have various bilateral programs, which some of them are more ambitious, some are less ambitious. So the question is whether we should invent something new, some new institution, however it is called continental partnership or European political community. I am a bit skeptical about this for basically two reasons. One is, I would say, conceptual, that it would be very difficult to find some institutional pattern which would, cover all these cases. This was, by the way, one of my reasons of my skepticism against this continental partnership, that it tried to address this to UK, to Turkey and Ukraine, each country completely different situation. So this is one thing. And another is that it's question of intention. Unfortunately, in the political reality, this kind of proposal very often serve as de facto derail EU membership ambitions of individual countries, create some kind of dead end. We will not accept you as member, but we try to propose something, some sort of substitute, which sounds nice, but nobody knows what it means concretely. I think it's not a productive approach. Now was question about bypassing Western Balkans. I think that the entire context of my presentation was clear that I don't want to bypass Western Balkans, as that this process should be reinvigorated and should be accelerated. Also, I think, Maria, very rightly you mentioned Kosovo. I think, well, it is for various reasons more complicated case, because as far as I well remember, 5 EU member states does not recognize still independence of Kosovo. This is very serious, I think, obstacle to move further in the process of EU integration. But I think that this problem should be also solved in some way sooner or later, because other way, first it's unfair vis-a-vis Kosovo, and second, I think it's also it will not solve problems stability in the Western Balkans region. I think this is all.
I'll come back
perhaps I missed something, but I will stop at this point.
Thank you, Marek. Andrej, my question was addressed to you directly, and I have one more question for the both of you before we close the session.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, in response to your good question, so what my wish, what you said, my wish list is just reading what grant accession status to new applicants. New applicants could include in my list here. Could include Bosnia and Herzegovina, since they've not received yet accession. But I mean, I've no problem at all to add to that the issue of launching negotiation with the Western Balkan countries that have received the candidate status and not yet the negotiation launched. Now, on the other issue, I think Yes, we have had a conference on the future of Europe, and in a sense, is to turn this conference into a process, a convention process. So potentially leading to reforms. Whether those reforms will require or not treaty change, I think that will be the purpose of the convention to put forward. But I think what is important is to do this. We are now in 2022, and to do this before the next European election. So in that sense, that's why it's very important to do this this week. I know it will be very difficult, as you know very well. Institutionally, the granting of candidate status, that requires unanimity. The launch of the convention does not require unanimity. So the result of the convention, that probably will require unanimity to the extent that there are institutional changes, but the launch does not. So it's very different from the accession process, where even the launch, that is to give candidate status, so the beginning of the process requires unanimity. Not only you need unanimity at the end, you also need at the beginning. For the convention, you need it at the beginning. You just need qualified majority, and then after that you would need. So that makes the two a little bit tricky. I mean, the joining of the two. They can be obviously bargaining on the part of countries, and we shall see what happens. There could be some countries that are very keen on the convention that would hold off on the accession process, on the candidate status, unless others agree on the convention. So some are wanting to do that, to link, to make sure that those countries that are less keen on the deepening, but that are very keen on the widening, would indeed make the link that Marek and I have been talking about, the complementary. So how do you do that politically? And this week could be a crunch time for that. And we shall see whether indeed it will be a crunch time. That is, whether some of the countries that are very keen to have the conventions are willing to not grant the status, the candidate status, unless they also get the other. And that's a different matter, but we shall see. So
I'm very aware of the time, and I want to ask the most difficult question at the end. Pavel, you told us about your impassionate plea to be more imaginative and to be more courageous. I want to ask you both, and I want very short answers, both to Marek and to Andrea. A question that is actually coming from the floor here, unfortunately it's anonymously posed. Can the EU afford not to expand? Marek.
In formal sense, yes, it can stop expanding, but I think that
they should.
It will not give good results. And referring to Paweł intervention, I would say that I personally think with some sort of sentiments about 1990s and politicians at that era who steered the EU and European politics, that they look much farther. They were ready to take uneasy initiatives, because things like launching the Euro project or launching the process of the Eastern enlargement, of subsequent treaty changes, Amsterdam Treaty and Nice Treaty, etc., that they really require overcoming some short-term domestic and European policy constraints. I would very much wish to have the same sort of approach, the same type of politicians now everywhere in Europe, because situation is much more demanding now even than it was 30 years ago. So we really need come back to long-term political projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. Andre?
Look, this is a
Yes or no?
this is a very tough question. I mean, I was, contrary to many of my fellow citizens from Belgium, I was very much in favor of the Eastern enlargement. I think in Belgium, if there had been a referendum back then, it would have been against enlargement to the east. Belgium being one of the 6 founding members. By that time we were 15. Some viewed in this country that the EU was already too large. And so going further was, viewed as the end of the European project as they had foreseen it. No, I was one who was in favor because I saw what had happened in Yugoslavia, and I thought that the alternative was total chaos in Europe. I know the history because of my family background. I know the history of Europe and of Central and Eastern Europe. I know what happened after First World War, and I knew that we had a long parenthesis, and then some of the problems, some of the cans that were closed, they could reopen and spring to our faces. So it would be much better to bring countries within the tent and then try to find some arrangement than, okay, it would cost us a little bit of GDP, and what is that compared to peace in Europe? So in a sense, I could say, well, okay, let me apply the same reasoning now, and I'm tempted to do that. On the other hand, to be very frank, I'm slightly worried that we are going to have a large, with Ukraine enlargement, if and when it will happen, we will have a very large border with Russia. Now, is the European Union that I know today able to deal with that? I have a question mark. Unless one is also, and I hope so obviously, unless one also comes at some stage before enlargement to Ukraine, whether again it's in 5, 10, 20 years, doesn't matter, that we have some kind of an arrangement in Europe with Russia as well. Otherwise, it would really worry me a great deal.
Jennifer, I'm very much aware that I'm eating from your coffee, but we don't have many people here. But what would the audience, or with a show of hands, can the EU not afford not to expand? Yes or no? Yes? Can the EU afford not to expand? Yes? And a no? Very, very few, actually, and very reluctant audience to vote. I don't think we have a clear vote, Marek, for you. Since you're not in the room, you can't see it. But the audience isn't decided on which way we should go. I think that probably reflects our experts as well. Well, with that, join me in thanking the speakers for the very interesting remarks. We will take a break for 10 minutes, and then we come to the second session. Thank you.
Thank you.